At least one sort of former number 10 person has said if my life depended on it, I would have claimed she already defected. Potentially all that Starmer has done is choose who his successor is, and it won't be Andy Burnham. It's much more likely now to be Wes Streeting.
Hello and welcome to Coffee House Shots, the Spectator's daily politics podcast. I'm Isabel Hardman, and today I'm joined by Tim Shipman and Gabriel Pogrund of the Sunday Times. Now, we have two big political fights today. One is the fight on the right with the defection of Suella Braverman to reform, but the other is the big story that has dominated Westminster headlines over the weekend, the return or not of Andy Burnham to Westminster. Gabriel, let's start with you. You were covering Andy Burnham's bid to return in the by-election over the weekend. Just tell us how that played out for you as a reporter.
I'll tell you, it played out as these things often do, namely in ways which were not wholly helpful for a Sunday newspaper journalist. But I suppose that wasn't Andy Burnham's first priority. I will say it occasioned a sudden return to the Labour Party rulebook, because as well as examining all the abstruse new rule which required Burnham to get the permission of the National Executive Committee, I was also getting my kind of rebooting my Kremlinology brain and trying to contemplate what would have happened in the event that there was a 5-5 split on the NEC officers group making the decision. And I was quite proud because there were a few people much more schooled in these matters than me who said they didn't know what would have happened. It may have fallen to a Shabana Mahmood's casting vote. In the end, we didn't get there. It was an 8-1, possibly Keir Starmer's last ever landslide victory. And I suppose for a while I've kind of been, I keep saying that there's the relationship between Andy Burnham's desire to return to Parliament and Morgan McSweeney's willingness to let that happen is inversely proportionate. And there's so many people in Westminster who think of these things in terms of 4D chess and slightly overcomplicate. But in the end, Keir Starmer probably made the decision he had to make.
It's such a decision from a point of weakness, though, isn't it? Because essentially he's saying, I'm too weak to let you back in. I know this is going to backfire and make me weak. But I'm too weak to, say, let's let the King of the North back into Parliament, and I have enough of a following in the country and enough self-confidence in what I want to do that this is fine. Tim, do you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, Gabriel's colleague on the Times, Patrick Maguire, introed his piece saying it was a choice between one form of weakness and another, and I think that's absolutely right. I, for one, don't believe for a second that my old colleague Gabriel doesn't keep copies of the Labour Party rulebook under his bed for nights when his baby isn't keeping him awake.
All-out war in the rulebook, yeah.
Well, only when you want to go to sleep, I'm sure. But yes, look, it's easy to say everybody's very upset about all this, and it's going to create more problems for Starmer than it's worth. But ultimately, he does still just about have enough power to face it down, which is why he's done that. I mean, why would he not buy himself some time and give himself a few months in the hope that something comes up and things begin to turn around? I remember a conversation with one of his senior aides just before Christmas, who laid out this amazing sort of happy picture of falling interest rates and rising public confidence in the economy and a gentle easing of the Labour civil war and a gentle rising of the sort of popularity ratings. And it's obviously, it feels like cloud cuckoo land at the moment, but, all good political leaders buy themselves some time. Theresa May looked dead for basically 2 years before she was finally ousted. Boris Johnson probably lasted 6 to 9 months longer than he might have done. And Keir Starmer, with the ability to stop one obvious threat in its tracks, has done so. Now, whether that then creates more problems and, potentially all that Starmer has done is choose who his successor is, and it won't be Andy Burnham. It's much more likely now to be Wes Streeting. But, he's not without levers, and it's highly understandable that he and McSweeney pulled one.
And Gabriel, who else does this benefit? It's not just Andy Burnham who is able to, I suppose, stay across the water and be the attractive alternative without any of his flaws being examined in the way that they would have done had he returned to Parliament. Had he indeed managed that, it's not a dead cert that he would have won that by-election given the political climate. As you said, you were working out, and like Shippers, I have to say, I just can't believe that there's any dust on your rule books at all, and that they are indeed well thumbed. But you were having to work out what would happen if Shabana Mahmood had the casting vote. Her stock is presumably up as a result of this.
That's right. I mean, I think that in the end, she didn't have to dip her hands in the blood or make a decision. I think that was what the great kind of tactical and possibly strategic challenge she faced was on at 5 p.m. on Saturday. Is there a world in which she would have to contrive some sort of fix with the General Secretary of the party to pull the vote or to stitch up a deal beforehand? In the end, the NEC reached the decision the leadership wanted. That's good news for Shabana Mahmood. It's great news for Wes Streeting. It's good news for Angela Rayner. It's good news for anybody that happens to think that they do a better job than Andy Burnham. And of course, it's good news for Keir Starmer. I agree with what Shippers was saying, which is, lots of things can be true at once. It is true that Starmer's project, such as it seems spent. It's not that clear where the kind of intellectual energy is or how he can possibly stagger on past May if all other things being equal. And yet, incumbency matters. That's probably one of the big lessons for over the last 48 hours. I confess, sat in the newsroom on Saturday, I thought, well, not only are there no good options, but choosing the bad option of blocking Burnham surely would trigger, an insurrection from the Parliamentary Labour Party. But then you actually remember, well, is that actually true? I mean, the Parliamentary Labour Party is as balkanised and divided as it always is. They're divided on the questions of who, how, when, what. Burnham's own group or in faction, Mainstream, prides itself on its intellectual heterodoxy and diversity. There's not a group of 250 MPs saying this is exactly what we want. And so in the absence of clarity, the beneficiary is always going to be the person who happens to occupy number 10 right now.
And Tim, this is one of the Labour Party's problems. It's not just that there are groups that disagree over who should be leader. That's the case in any party. It's that within those groups, a lot of MPs don't really know what Labour should be for. They've got some idea. They've ended up with a leader who himself doesn't really know. He sort of believed in getting things done well, but has managed to, U-turn on, what are we at now? 15 U-turns, 13, 14. And so the problem that the party has is that it doesn't really know what it is and who it is anymore. So how can it possibly unite around one potential new leader when it's so confused?
I think that's absolutely 100% correct. There's two things here. I think your point I'll come back to because I think it's spot on. And I think Andy Burnham is a particularly problematic character in that regard because this is someone whose positions have changed and evolved quite a lot. But Burnham's made two calculations. The first was last autumn, which was that going very close to going over the top just before the party conference would enhance his standing. And I think in a lot of regards it damaged his standing. He said some rather daft things about ignoring the markets at a time when government borrowing is at such a level that this government is on a knife edge in terms of market support. I think that was astonishingly naive and I think damaged his chances of rolling into that conference and looking like a serious alternative before it even got off the ground. Now, what's his calculation now? So politically, is it the case that he knew he'd be blocked, so he thought he'd stand anyway, put himself forward, put it on to Starmer to block him, and make him look like someone who was at least prepared to have a go and avoid that charge, which is sometimes levelled at Burnham, that he's a serial bottler, because that has happened in the past. If that was his calculation, it may prove to be reasonably clever. But at the same time, what is Andy Burnham for? We don't really know. And I think that the drawback from the perspective of the Labour Party is that we won't now find out really, beyond just moaning from afar that the leadership isn't doing what he wants, or in his role as Mayor of Manchester moaning that London is a terrible place and isn't giving us enough money. I'm not quite sure what we've learnt about the alternative prospectus that Andy Burnham would put together. You look then at Wes Streeting, who, you know, like Burnham in his younger years, appeared to be a bit of a Blairite, but is now tacking to the left. We still don't really know exactly what Wes Streeting thinks, apart from that Wes Streeting thinks he should be the Prime Minister. And then, you know, it's a bit clearer what Angela Rayner thinks in the round, in that she's more for sort of left-wing solutions. But do we actually know in practice what that would mean in terms of management of the economy and how much extra borrowing and all that sort of thing? We don't really. And I think, you know, this is part of the problem of Starmer's reign as leader. Starmer himself, as has become very clear, doesn't really have a strong view of what he wants to do. There was a time when it looked like Morgan McSweeney had a fairly strong view and he was going to use Starmer to execute it, but that has pushed up against sufficient reaction within the Labour Party. But even the left spent so much of the time post-Jeremy Corbyn just desperate to get into power, not really saying what it really thought, or indeed spending much time thinking about what the sort of political economy of the left in a time of financial strictures might actually look like. And it's not clear to me that any of these factions have got any kind of coherent worldview about what should be done and what should be done differently. And as a result of that, you know, if they do want rid of Starmer because he's lacklustre and uninspiring, then they're going to have that debate very much in public, and that will inevitably lead to quite a lot of division and quite a lot of psychodrama, which, you know, the public has shown time and time again in opinion polls and in general elections it doesn't really like very much.
Speaking of psychodrama, that term until recently was very closely associated with the Conservatives, but the Labour Party is quickly learning that it's not that it's not unique to
hold my beer. They say.
Exactly. Anyone in government these days. But thank goodness for the steady stream of ex-Conservative MPs going to reform, Gabriel. And we've had another one today. Just bring us up to date.
That's right. Suella Braverman, former Tory Home Secretary, has told a rally of Reform supporters that she feels like she's come home. She's defected. That's final. She has the additional benefit from Nigel Farage's point of view of being a sitting Tory MP. There are lots of people to whom the word to whom the word former has been appended upon defecting to Reform lately, but she's still in the Commons, and that matters if you're Farage, who's trying to kind of present himself as the essential vehicle for the right and trying to present Tories as being old news. So I suppose, without getting into the meta commentary, when you actually just asked me to say what happened, it definitely underscores the big strategic question, which is, does it help Farage to bring all these former Tory cabinet ministers into Reform? I suppose he did outline only recently with Rob Jenrick's defection that there was a timeline, there was a deadline rather, and that, you know, this isn't going to be a drumbeat that will continue into the next election. And so, you know, Braverman for that reason may feel her hands have been forced. But you'll correct me if I'm wrong, Isabel Shippers, it feels a little bit inevitable as well when you look at the complexion of her politics as well.
Well, it did look at one stage like this was going to be something that happened a year ago, and at least one sort of former number 10 person has said if my life depended on it, I would have claimed she already defected. So this feels like the least surprising of all the big recent defections. Look, I think Farage is very conscious he lacks experience and that the people around him lack experience, and so he's happy to take former sort of big name cabinet ministers who've got genuine sort of top table experience. But I think, you know, we talk about psychodrama. Suella Braverman and some of these other characters they're all quite sort of melodramatic characters, and having lots of them around the table may be something that Nigel Farage regrets in the end. Right now, it all is good for him building up momentum, but there are definitely people in the Tory party who are sort of like, well, it's not the end of the world. We're shot of some of these people. But again, the Tories seem completely split on what they want to do and where they want to go. We've seen the launch of this new sort of One Nation group with Andy Street and Ruth Davidson and former cabinet ministers like David Gauke and Amber Rudd. I don't think most pollsters would tell you that that heading back towards the left is going to save the Tory party from the oblivion that may await it. And that will only perhaps hasten the departure of some other Tory defectors to reform if they think that Kevin Badenoch is listening to those people. Either that or it will look like the sort of last knockings of the One Nation group. So the Tories, who have looked relatively united of late compared with Labour, are now sort of looking at another kind of big ideological debate about where their party should position itself. So really, there are big problems in all of these parties. And I think that's sort of inevitable. I think we're in a state of flux at the moment in British politics where, as Tony Blair once said, the pieces of the kaleidoscope are all moving around and we're waiting to see where they settle. And I think to a degree, people in Labour, in the Tories, in Reform, perhaps a bit less in the Greens, are sort of trying to work out who lands where, what do all these different parties stand for. And I would hope over the next couple of years that all becomes a great deal clearer. But at the moment, it feels like there's a lot of jostling for position going on with people changing sides and ideas rising and falling and leadership debates happening here, there and everywhere. And we're going to have to just get used to quite a bit of sort of febrile action, I think, for the next year or so.
Brace yourself for febrile action, which we will cover in depth on Coffee House Shots every day. Well, thank you so much, Tim and Gabriel, and thank you for listening.